Welcome back to Energy Story. Today we're talking about electric cars and trying to answer whether or not they're actually beneficial for the environment. The question's not as easy as it may sound, and we're going to look at three elements in terms of the emissions that they produce when they're running, where the energy actually comes from, and the energy required in producing those cars. The first one's the easy one. The emissions that cars produce when they're actually driving. It should be fairly obvious that electric cars produce no emissions when they're driving. No carbon dioxide and no other important pollutants like sulfur and nitrogen. Hybrid cars and plug-in hybrid cars also produce a lot fewer emissions. This is really important in bigger cities where policy is really trying to grapple with the pollution problems that internal combustion engines are causing. The second point is probably more complicated in the fact that we need to look at where exactly the energy is coming from to produce all of the energy required to drive those cars. For most people, the energy to charge the electric cars will be coming from the national grid. That national grid will be fed by a host of different power stations from different sources. For example, coal, wind, hydro, gas, nuclear. The collective carbon footprint of these is often really easy to find in most Western countries. For example, in the UK, it averages between 200 and 300 grams per kilowatt hour. What does that actually mean in terms of comparing that to a standard petrol car? An average electric vehicle will probably get between 4 and 5 kilometres per kilowatt hour. So that roughly equates to 60 to 80 grams per kilometre. If you look at a standard normal vehicle, it will probably produce at best around 100 grams per kilometre. So you can see that there is a benefit to electric cars just on what the grid is producing now. It's important also to note that a lot of countries are pursuing lower carbon agendas. This means that the average carbon intensity of the grids will reduce over time. Indeed, in the UK, it's forecast that the grid may reduce to around 100 grams per kilowatt hour in the coming decades. This means that electric cars will be significantly less carbon intensive using the energy from the grid than they would using an internal combustion engine. One of the key arguments against electric vehicles is often that the energy cost of producing things like batteries is a significant extra part of the life cycle energy of a car. Having looked into this, the research kind of backs this up. However, not completely, in the fact that an average electric car will require an additional maybe 1 to 4 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent to produce the batteries and the other equipment that's necessary for the car. This is improving as time goes by as we get more efficient in generating those batteries. So what does this actually mean in terms of the trade-off? Well, it will probably pay back after about 20,000 kilometres. And that's not unrealistic for most cars to drive at least 20,000 kilometres over their lifetime. Indeed, most cars will average around 200,000 kilometres, if not more. So on this evidence, it suggests that an electric car will produce more CO2 in its production, but that will pay back fairly quickly as the car is used. While this is a fairly simplistic comparison between electric cars and internal combustion cars, it does kind of suggest that on the whole, depending on country and generation mix, that electric cars are beneficial for the environment. We haven't gone into detail on things like transportation. For example, there are grid losses as electricity is transported across the distribution networks. We cover that in other stories on energystory.org. But it's important to note that just the transportation of oil products around the globe is fairly carbon intensive. Drilling it out of the ground, for example, also produces carbon dioxide. I believe that electric cars are probably part of the solution in terms of moving to the future, but there are other technologies out there. We'll try and cover those in future stories too. As always, I'm really keen to hear your feedback, so leave a comment below. And please do visit energystory.org. You can find all of the information that I've used in generating this story there. Thanks again for watching, and see you soon.